So when we look at nutrition science in general, with regard to predicting how long we're going to live, if we're going to get heart disease or cancer, is so incredibly weak. The data that we use to make those assumptions is almost completely worthless. I'm never going to say an all-meat diet is going to make you live the longest, because I don't know. No one knows. But no one can tell you what any diet can make you live the longest.
How many death threats do you get a day from the vegans?
It's mostly, we hope you die of cancer and heart disease. I mean, this is the thing. There's people that talk about it, and there's people that have done it. Most people don't know that a handful of raw cashews will kill you. I think we need to step back and say, how do I take sick people and make them healthy? If we were just to do that, a huge win, we would no longer be spending, $3.7 trillion on healthcare. The supposition is meat is unhealthy. We hear this all the time. So we've got this 30-40% reduction in red meat consumption, particularly beef, and yet what's going on with our disease rates? They're going up. Up. So what we can really do is we say we can take people that are sort of diseased. They're overweight, they're obese, they're inflamed, they have diabetes, they have autoimmune disease, they have gastrointestinal problems, and we can take them from that situation and we can move them to the non-disease state. That's all we can realistically do. And so we make all this effort in trying to say, you need to eat this way so you can live longer, when we have no idea. If we were really serious about this stuff, we would be going after the junk food. Stop producing it, stop buying it, stop eating it. And that's the thing. A lot of people, their entire joy in life is eating. And that's kind of a sad situation.
New York City is a great city. Every block, every neighborhood is different. Such a powerful environment.
It's a town, I think, where there's so much opportunity. There's also a lot of pressure. It says you either make it or we're going to go on to the next person.
New York has a mystique that tends to draw the most talented people in the United States and indeed the world to it.
I am back from New York City. It was noisy, it was crazy, and it was full of incredible personalities, including Shawn Baker. And he's the author of The Carnivore Diet, and he's inspired people like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson to go completely meat-based. Now, this is super controversial and honestly kind of boggles the mind at first, but once you actually get into his ideas and mentality, it starts making sense, and it makes sense for Shawn. Now, he's a former orthopedic surgeon who knows his medicine. He's also still an athlete, holds some world records, still rows competitively, and he survives on an all-meat diet. It makes him healthy, it makes him thrive, and he's here to question a lot of the assumptions that have been made by plant-based advocates. And he goes on to say, look, there's no history that shows that we were ever plant-based. He goes on to say that the actual health system itself can suffer more when people aren't eating meats. And the reason he likes the carnivore diet is because it cuts out most of the nonsense that people are eating. All the processed foods, all the glutens, all the sugars, and it's a great way to get a reset, and he sees immediate results. He also questions some of the numbers and some of the science of people like Dr. McGregor and Neil Barnard, because he says we just can't tell from these numerical studies. There's no proof. We haven't done these studies long enough in a double-blind case. And look, I know there's going to be a lot of controversy here, but I think it's important to entertain people with other ideas. He speaks really intelligently, and it makes you really think if there are some benefits to this carnivore diet and how all of us could at least attempt it maybe and see how we feel. Most of you know I went completely plant-based for a year when I did my Ironman race and we filmed the movie Iron Mind, and I saw some benefits and it changed my health. But I'm no longer plant-based, and I'd like to explore all things that make me feel better, that make me healthier, and make me contribute to this world, and that's what Shawn is all about. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please go in with an open mind, and of course, let me know what you think in the comments. Take care. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Shawn Baker, the American orthopedic surgeon, elite athlete, and former nuclear weapons launch officer. You are the face of the Carnivore Diet, a movement that includes names like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson. You're the founder and CEO of MeatRx, an organization that educates and promotes the benefits of an all-meat diet. You recently published The Carnivore Diet, a book that was praised by meat lovers and ridiculed by vegans. Today, you inspire hundreds of thousands of people to eat meat-based through your YouTube channel and keynote speeches. Shawn, welcome to London Real in New York City.
Brian, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's great having you here. I can't wait to dive into all of this stuff. I first wanted to ask you, how many death threats do you get a day from the vegans?
Yeah, I get some. I mean, mostly it's wishes. It's not threats. It's mostly, we hope you die of cancer and heart disease and that sort of stuff. But I mean, honestly, probably 98% of what I receive is very positive, and so that's a very small minority. I pointed out just because it's interesting and entertaining more than anything else.
What, that you get those kind of comments,
Right? Sure.
And, Joe Rogan, who you originally on his show, that's how I first heard about you. He recently posted a video. Went carnivore for a month or is still doing it off and on. And he took his shirt off and he's like, I lost weight and I feel pretty good. Obviously, Jordan Peterson has been doing this for quite a while as well and had a lot of success. A lot of his autoimmune stuff, really went down. What do you make of when you see Joe and his success? And I know you've been talking to him as well.
Sure.
Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all because I see it all the time. His results are not atypical at all. This is what I see day in and day out from not from tens or 20s, but hundreds and thousands of people. So I see that continuously. I mean, I really applaud Joe for actually doing it. I mean, this is a thing. There's people that talk about it and there's people that have done it. And I think there's a big difference there. And I think what he is seeing with regards of decreased inflammation, joint pain. It's kind of funny, he tells the same story that I did. When I was on his show, I said, look, I did it for 30 days. I came off and ate a bunch of stuff, including an apple, which people somehow think it was all the apple. But I said, I ate all kinds of foods and some symptoms came back. And he kind of looked at me kind of like, you're kind of crazy. And it's kind of funny, it's kind of ironic that, 2.5 years later, he does the same thing, basically has the exact same experience, which I thought was, maybe a little bit of validation, but good for him for trying it.
And what are some of those things people experience when they go on meat only? And the same that you did and Joe did.
Well, I think this is, let me just back up and frame things from the big picture, because I'm really a big picture type of guy. And so when we look at nutrition science in general, and I will say, a lot of us like to use the term evidence-based medicine, right? We all talk about evidence-based medicine. Where did that term come from? That term was coined in 1991 by Professor Gordon Guyatt, who is a professor of medicine up at McMaster University in Canada. He is the guy that actually invented that term. He's been doing evidence-based medicine evaluation for 30 plus years. And so I recently interviewed him, talked about this, and he basically says our nutrition science, with regard to predicting how long we're going to live, if we're going to get heart disease or cancer, is so incredibly weak. The data that we use to make those assumptions is almost completely worthless. And so, his position is we can't even use nutritional guidelines because the evidence is so weak. And a lot of people, so when we debate about what diet is best, we're really debating on extremely weak evidence.
As in they can't find a correlation between.
Well, I mean, they do epidemiologic studies, which are notoriously awful. I mean, they're like based on food frequency questionnaires or based on what did I think I eat. What did I think I ate 6 months ago? You try to remember it. We know that when we actually compare what they actually eat, when we do studies, people overestimate fruit and vegetable consumption by something like 82% or something like that. So when some of these studies that show this,
they don't like to admit they haven't eaten.
Right. So the perceptions are they can't remember these things, and then also they sometimes overestimate or underestimate because they want to answer the question correctly. So we can't rely on any of these things to tell us. I'm never going to say an all-meat diet is going to make you live the longest because I don't know. No one knows. But no one can tell you what any diet can make you live the longest. And so what we can really do is we can take people that are sort of diseased. They're overweight, they're obese, they're inflamed, they have diabetes, they have autoimmune disease, they have gastrointestinal problems, and we can take them from that situation and we can move them to the non-disease state. That's all we can realistically do. And so we make all this effort in trying to say, you need to eat this way so you can live longer, when we have no idea. We have no idea what diet's going to do that. So I think we need to step back and say, how do I take sick people and make them healthy? If we were just to do that, in Western medicine in the United States, we would have a huge win. We would no longer be spending, $3.7 trillion on healthcare. All we got to do is just change the goalposts a little bit, and then we can argue about how do you get there? What diet seems to work? But what your original question was, what are we seeing with the diet? So the supposition is meat is unhealthy. We hear this all the time. We've been hearing it for 50 years, particularly red meat. Red meat is healthy. It's going to give you heart disease. It's going to make you obese. It's going to give you diabetes. It's going to make you inflamed. And therefore, if that were true, then you'd say, well, people that eat not just a little bit of meat, not just a little bit more than the average person, but people that eat 10, 15, 20 times the average American amount would be the sickest people on the planet, right? That's what you would assume. But what we see reliably is these people lose weight, they lose body fat, they get leaner, they put on muscle, they lose visceral fat, their inflammatory markers go down both objectively and clinically, their joint pain goes away, their autoimmune symptoms go away. The really exciting thing to me is a lot of their mental health symptoms get improved, you know, whether it's anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, even PTSD. I see these people improving, which is really, really surprising.
Really?
You know, and we can talk about why that may be going on.
Okay.
But,
and why in small doses was it proven or was it not to be harmful? And then why in mega doses is it the opposite? I mean,
well, I don't think it's ever been proven. You know, if I were to ask you, you know, we talk about how much, you know, red meat or beef in particular the average American eats, and we make this, we eat so much, but we eat on average about 2.4 ounces a day. I mean, that's a tiny part of our diet, and to blame all of our ills on this tiny, tiny fraction of our calories. We eat more calories in soybean oil than we do beef today. I mean, this is a shocking fact.
As an average, you're saying?
As an average, right. I mean, obviously, I eat more than the average person as far as beef. You know, in mid-1970s, the average American was eating about 100 pounds of beef a year. Now we eat about 56 pounds. And so we've got this, you know, 30, 40% reduction in red meat consumption, particularly beef. And yet, what's going on with our disease rates? They're going up. You know, they're going up, 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 up.
Do you think everyone points a finger at red meat when in fact it's all the saturated fats and the sugars and a lot of the carbs and the obesity?
Well, I think here's what I would say. You know, if we're honest about this, you know, obviously there are people that are doing whole food plant-based diets that are improving. Right? You experience that. You've got Dr. Michael Greger, you've got Neil Bernard all saying, look at the benefits, look at the benefits. Undoubtedly, we see some benefits. But what is the commonality? None of those guys are eating a bunch of sugar. None of those guys are eating a bunch of, you know, oils. None of those guys are eating a bunch of refined, you know, grains, you know, Twinkies, you know, garbage. So when you take that out of the diet, I think that's the greatest offender. You know, we can argue, we can go back ancestral, and I can make an evolutionary plausible argument for eating a meat-based diet or a mostly meat-based diet. I think that's fairly reasonable to do, but we can always say we don't know for sure. Until somebody invents a time machine, we're never gonna know. But what I can tell you is they weren't eating Twinkies, they weren't eating Doritos, they weren't eating Crisco. I mean, there's some things we know they didn't eat for sure. And those things that have been introduced to the modern diet, the industrialized, you know, chemical slop basically, is my view, what's really causing most of the problems.
And so the people that show success with plant-based, you're saying it's because maybe they're cutting out a lot of the other things. So you're okay with people doing plant-based diets because it could be a healthy option for them?
Certainly. I, despite what people sort of want to say about me, I'm completely supportive. If somebody wants to do a plant-based diet and it works for them, good for them. You know, I'm all supportive for that. You know, the same thing, they should afford me and others like me the right to do a diet that's, you know, mostly a meat-based diet or a completely meat-based diet if needed. You know, the standard American diet, as much as we malign, is 70% plant-based. I mean, you look at it from a caloric and a volume standpoint, you know, unfortunately, most of it is processed grain, sugar, soy, you know, seed oils and things like that, but those are still plant-based products. You know, we were still eating a relatively small percentage of our food coming from meat. You know, if we look at, and again, epidemiology is not that good, but we can find plenty of examples. I've used this example plenty of times. Hong Kong, I don't know if you've been to Hong Kong, you might have, but
yeah,
they eat a lot of meat in Hong Kong. If we look at the stats on this, Hong Kong reliably lives longer than almost anybody in the world. You know, if you just Google Hong Kong life expectancy, you're gonna see Hong Kong tops the life expectancy in the, you know, for the world for the second year in a row. And then you look at Hong Kong meat consumption, and they eat on average like 1.6 pounds of meat per day per person, which is far more than we eat here in the United States, way more than we eat in the UK. It's like 4 times what the UK eats. So these people live the longest, eat way more meat, and also they have the highest IQ on the planet, which, you know, is kind of an interesting observation.
Well, some people come back and just say that's a small sample size, or that's that one.
Well, I mean, it's you know, certainly it's bigger than all the blue zones combined. There's 7 million people in Hong Kong, right? I mean, so you've got a big sample size, you know, and you know, you could say, and this is the point, life expectancy is not based on diet. I mean, it's a small component of that. You know, there's so many things. Wealth is probably the biggest thing. Access to, you know, fresh water, access to health care. You know, those types of things are going to drive life expectancy more than anything else. Right. But at the same time, we could look at Monaco, we could look at Switzerland, we could look at Iceland, all these countries. You know, Iceland has some of the most centenarian males on the planet. And Iceland's a frozen rock. You know, they don't have mangoes and fresh fruits and vegetables growing there. These guys traditionally grew up on dairy, you know, primarily lamb, seafood. You know, they had a little bit of grain they imported from Denmark, but that was traditionally their traditional diet, and those guys lived, you know, a long time as well.
Yeah, you know, Michael Greger, I've had him on the show twice. I had Neil Barnard on this last year. Obviously, I went a year plant-based after I met John Joseph, and John challenged me to do a half Ironman race on a plant-based diet. Now, I had kind of flirted with plant-based before, but I had never done it. And he said, Brian, you're gonna find you don't have the injuries. And I was 47 when I did this, and all this other stuff. I didn't believe him. I went plant-based. I did struggle in the beginning to get enough calories, but once I started doing it, I did feel good on it. I didn't have injuries, which kind of blew my mind, but I, of course, didn't do a test with meat only. And I kept it up for the whole year. I just thought, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna give this a try. But towards the end of the year, I said, Shawn, am I doing this because I'm being dogmatic, or am I doing this because it's the right thing to do? And I have a whole history of taking things to the extreme in bad ways, sometimes with drugs, sometimes with money, you know, so I can just get in there and just do it to do it, you know? And at the end of the year, I was like, I don't know if this feels right. So I had a little bit of sushi, and my stomach was like, this is okay. And I had some red meat, and my stomach was like, this is okay. And I just started thinking to myself, you know what? I'm gonna bring these things back in my diet. And that was my experience. I'm sure I made a lot of enemies in that vegan community. And in my movie, I had Charles Poliquin in the movie Iron Mind. And Charles was the anti-vegan. He was laughing at me. He was saying, I trained, like he's dead now, but he trained hundreds and hundreds of Olympic athletes. He said none of them were vegan. And he was saying all these comments. And I'm telling you, Shawn, I had vegans that came up to me at the movie premiere and said, Brian, I think he's right. And I was like, what? I mean, these are guys that would never come to my Thanksgiving meal. They were always bringing me pieces of fruit. And he changed some of their minds, and they kind of went back. And there's one of my vegan friends, Timothy Sheaf, who was the vegan prince for 6 years. And now he's like, Brian, you don't understand. All of these vegan influencers, they cheat, they're unhealthy. I mean, he's really gone completely the other way.
Yeah, I talked to Charles. Charles called me up several months before he passed away and talked to me and said, you know, you're doing the right thing, and this has been my experience. And he said, I never felt better in my life, you know, compared to the time I was eating, you know, 5-6 pounds of meat a day. And, you know, he's obviously a big guy, you know, bodybuilder type guy. And then, of course, I've talked with Tim as well, you know, because he, you know, obviously had that experience where he, you know, changed his mind significantly. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, you're going to do what's right for you. I've seen, you know, thousands and thousands. In fact, I started a Facebook group for ex-vegans, and we've got thousands of members of folks that, you know, they tried it and it didn't work for them, and that's fine. You know, I mean, I honestly think, you know, you should try it both ways. Don't get dogmatic, because here's a problem. They get tied up in the ideology, and they lose the purpose of why they may be doing it in the first place. You know, you do it for your health, and if it doesn't work for your health, then that's a problem, I think. You know, I've talked to, you know, I used to engage with those folks online more, and I just realized it was a waste of time. But the one question I would ask them, I said, look, if you needed to eat an animal product to either save your life or improve your health, would you do it? And invariably they'd say no. And I said, well, then you're just not rational. I can't, you know, understand that position. But I mean, you know, that's their ideological belief, and they're entitled to it.
Well, that's the problem with veganism, is it's wrapped up in this, you know, ideology of I'm not going to harm other sentient beings, which is noble, and it sounds like a great idea, but you get wrapped up into that. So then you start making choices based on that and not your health. And Tim said the same thing. He's like, Brian, you know, at the end of the day, my health and my performance is more important. If I have to drink some milk, I'm going to do it. And he made that change.
Sure.
But he had to walk away from a lot of stuff.
Yeah, this is a good way to transition into like a sustainability argument, because people talk about what's sustainable. I will tell you what's clearly not sustainable is sick people. You know, if we look at if we want to frame it in the frame of, say, greenhouse gases, which is sort of a, you know, hot topic right now.
Cowspiracy went deep into that, right?
Yeah, and they had some really weird numbers from the World Resource Institute. That's been totally debunked.
You didn't buy the CO2 or the methane numbers.
Well, the cows breathing CO2 out was a greenhouse gas pollutant. That's been completely dismissed. But when we talk about, impact, like we're in New York right now, we're in the United States, and this is what, I'm sure many people that watch this show live in the United States, and we try to make an impact. Well, we look at the healthcare industry. The U.S. healthcare sector puts out 10% of our greenhouse gases, and so if we want to make that argument, then we can say, well, what does animal agriculture put out in the United States? Well, it's 4%. This is all EPA data. So you're like, well, and cows are 2%. So you're like, well, what if I'm not sick anymore? I've just taken away from contributing to 10% of the greenhouse gases, and I'm contributing to the 2%. And that's just an easy metric to do. But people, again, when we myopically focus, and we see this with medicine, with cholesterol or any other biomarker, when we myopically focus on one area, we don't step back and say, what's the overall impact, the big picture? We see it time and time again, these unintended consequences. Well, what if people decide they're going to give up meat? And this is the interesting thing. So let's say we've got all this environmental cries about saving the planet and doing the right thing ethically. How did industry respond? What was a big response? And we see it. It's Beyond Meat. It's the Impossible Burger. Well, what is it? That's just more chemical processed garbage. And I know Neil Bernard was on here saying, well, it's perfect. Look at the ingredients. I mean, it's literally garbage for us. That has been the response. So the answer is, we're going to save the planet by feeding you more crap? I mean, that makes no sense. And so it's, I think there's other solutions.
Which makes you unhealthy and then taxes the healthcare system.
Taxes healthcare system,
the financial costs. I mean, you were a doctor for many years. It's, what, 20% of GDP is spent?
Yeah, it's huge, and it's going
healthcare?
up. I mean, we spend $3.5 trillion and growing every year in healthcare. I mean, it's ridiculous. And what do we have to show for it in the U.S.? The fattest, sickest, weakest, disabled, depressed population on the planet. I mean, that's what we've got for all this.
Michael Greger's book, How Not to Die, goes through 12 different ailments, from diabetes to heart disease to lung cancer, and says all of them are reduced by a plant-based diet. How do you say that's not true? Because it's evidence-based and there's not a specific clinical trial?
Well, I would say to do the studies, it would prove what he says. To get the actual clinical endpoints, to say that I'm going to eat a certain way for 20 years and I'm not going to get lung cancer. We can't do it. We just cannot do those studies. I go back to my original position. We can take people that are currently sick and make them currently healthy. And if we just limit the discussion to that, then we have a very different picture. Now, when he says a plant-based diet, what is he including? What is he not including? Certainly he's not including people eating, Oreo cookies and drinking Coca-Cola and, drinking Mazola corn oil. I mean, those are all plant-based items. So you just get rid of the garbage food. And I think they ideologically lump in meat in there. They're like, well, we don't like red meat because we don't like the way that, an animal has to die for this. And, they ignore all the animals that are dying anyway for they call it unintentional kills. And I'm like, well, they put pesticides. What's the actual definition of a pesticide? I mean, it's intentionally designed to kill bugs and other small animals. I mean, these are not unintentional things. You go to talk to any rancher or farmer, they literally shoot animals that are eating their food. And so, the question is, well, how many of them? I'm guilt-free because I can ignore that. I mean, I can go to the grocery store and buy a steak and say, well, I'm pretending those animals don't get killed. I mean, it's just what you want to ignore and what you don't. But I mean, to his point, I don't doubt that cutting garbage out of your diet is going to make you healthier. I mean, clearly you're going to have people that are, there are fat, overweight, sick vegans, and what are they eating? They're eating the Oreos and the Doritos and all that crap. But when you go to a whole food plant-based diet, and obviously I would be supportive of that if that's your choice. I mean, you can eat whatever you want. If you want to be fat and sick, that's up to you. But that's a difference from saying I've taken out just meat from the diet, because I've seen people that are eating a very otherwise clean diet, and they remove vegetables and they get better, which is really shocks people, and that really upsets people, because we have this sort of belief that vegetables can do no wrong. The more we can eat of them, you've got people that just eat 10 cups a day, and you're gonna be the healthiest person in the world. And I'm here to say that maybe for some people that's not the best option, and I think we can explore that, because I've seen it over and over again. People with particularly gut inflammatory issues, they just pound all this fiber and they just feel awful. They remove it and they feel better. So we have to understand that.
Why do we have these human biases where it's like, oh, kale is natural and it's right off the vine, and it's versus a steak that has to be slaughtered from a cow that's bleeding and screaming, and then we fry it up and it's one color. And like naturally we think, oh, this is healthy. You know, like people think orange juice is healthy when the science says it's a bunch of sugar.
Well, I mean, yeah, orange juice, I mean, they store it in giant vats. It's there for a year. They put, you know, basically chemicals in from like cologne, basically, the same sort of chemicals to make it taste like orange juice. It's kind of scary when you look at how that's done. But we've got this sort of belief, you know, like we all have the bias. I mean, we know what's around us. I'm walking around New York. You can get any kind of food in the world. I walk 4 miles from Central Park to get here, and I'm looking at all the restaurants and all the great flavors and food and all the cultures. And we have this belief that we're supposed to eat a bunch of colors and all these beautiful things from the rainbow. And then you just kind of think about it. And you go back into our history. We don't have to go back 50 years, 50,000 years. We can go back 200 years. And we're like, how would that even have been plausible? You know, I would have never been able to eat Indian food and, you know, African food and South American food in the same block. I mean, this is stuff that doesn't even grow on the same continent. And so there's people like, you know, we've got this sort of concept that this balanced diet, we have to have a balanced diet. And then you look at what's on the balanced diet and you're like, well, that doesn't even grow on the same continent as that. How would I have ever done that before? You know, how would I have done that before modern refrigeration and modern, you know, transportation, worldwide transportation? Wasn't even plausible. I mean, even if we say we eat just an omnivorous diet, which clearly we are omnivorous animals, I would say there's some argument about being a facultative carnivore. But if you think about the plausibility, and I mentioned this before, you know, what food can we get in every continent, all throughout the year, every season, and it's not a plant. I mean, there's no plant that grows everywhere on the planet that you can say, I must have that. But you can get animals everywhere, and we've eaten every animal on the planet. I mean, we are apex predators. We've eaten whales, we've eaten shark, we've eaten seal, we've eaten lion, we've eaten cow. There's no other animal that has done what we could do as far as, you know, being a predator. People say we don't have fangs and claws and pointy teeth. We've got a big brain. That was our weapon. Our brain is our weapon, and our brain developed because we had access to rich nutrition, high-calorie food. And you think about it from a foraging strategy. If you and I were to, you know, magically be transported back 200,000 years, and we've got a spear, and there's these food options, and we've got these slow, big-moving animals that don't run away. You know, you've been on safari. Elephants don't run from little animals because they're so big. They don't really have any natural predators. You know, maybe they're babies from a lion, but they're just so big they don't run away. And so when humans kind of evolved spear technology, I mean, it was just a killing field. There's plenty of anthropologic evidence to indicate that. And so the question would be, would I eat these leaves, which one don't provide any calories? I mean, there's no calories, and that's one of the reasons plant-based diet works well, because you're eating all this food and there's no calories in there. But two, they don't taste particularly good. You know, if you and I were to walk around, well, I guess maybe Central Park, I don't know if there's much vegetation where we're at now, but and start sampling random leaves or land, we would get sick. We wouldn't want to eat that. There'd be no real reason to us to eat that. So I think, you know, if I were to say what's a natural human diet, it's probably some fruit. It's probably a lot of meat. There's probably maybe some starches, maybe some nuts. Remember, underground, you know, potatoes and seeds and nuts. If you don't prep them, you don't process them meticulously, they're very poisonous to us. You know, most people don't know that a handful of raw cashews will kill you.
Is that true?
Absolutely.
Raw
cashews will kill you if you eat them, 10 of them. If you eat like 5 or 6 raw kidney beans, they'll kill you. They literally will die. So we had to figure this out. We had to figure out how to make those foods access their nutrition and reduce their toxicity. And then their soaking and sprouting and cooking eventually helped us out and all those things. But prior to that, those things would not have been good food choices. I mean, all the roots and stuff like that were extremely fibrous. We've done all the breeding, so we make them more starchy, so there's more calories. But initially, it wasn't a particularly good source of food, and that would not have been reliable to grow this big brain.
So it would have had to have been meat, is what you're saying.
Well, look at this. There's a lot of primates on Earth that are still here, and there's been a lot of primates before, and there's been a lot of hominid attempts at, you know, evolution, and they're not here. Humans are here still. Look at all these primates that have been around for at least 25 million, maybe 40 million years. They've been eating fruit, and they've been eating a few ants and bugs for you know, millions upon millions of years, and they still got that 300 cc brain. So, you know, if that would have been enough to grow our brain, then we would have done it, you know, that way.
Has that been proven, though, that the high-calorie food is what grew our brain?
That is, you know, Aiello and Wheeler's expensive tissue hypothesis is what a lot of people use to show that. And there's pretty good plausible evidence for that. You know, we've looked at, there's some studies on sort of mammalian development, you know, looking at weaning. So like an indigenous a human will usually breastfeed for about 2.5 years. That's, and we don't do that normally. I mean, most women are 6 months or a year or something like that. But because they need that high calorie, high nutrient dense food. So what is breast milk? It's a lot of saturated fat, it's a lot of cholesterol. And by the way, there's carbohydrate in there. There's lactose in there. So you need this high amounts of energy to grow that brain. And then we can compare when human brain development finishes relative to when we wean. And when we look at that, the only way to make that happen is by providing continued high calorie, nutrient dense food. And so in the natural world, that's animal fat. Now we have ways to process grain to make it highly calorically dense, which we didn't have, 50, 100,000 years ago. So now we can supplement, now we can give infants fruit juice and, rice cereals and all those things that we wouldn't have had possible back then. So that's I think what shows that we had that big brain because of that.
Yeah. You mentioned the ethical question earlier. I just want to address that again, because the vegans say we're not hurting the animals, and then your point is that when you grow vegetables, you are going to be killing these things, bugs and rodents and all these other things. I had Timothy Sheaf say, Brian, I killed one cow and I could potentially eat for 200 days. I eat a few soybeans and there might have been 20 animals that died. I mean, that was his counter argument to that. What do you say when you hear the vegans talk to you about ethical, when they show you the slaughterhouses and say this is cruel and not fair?
Sure.
Do they have a point?
Well, I think they have a point. There is certainly practices within industrial agriculture which are not good, and we should and I think most people in the industry, because I talk to ranchers and farmers all the time, and they say we don't support this. That's not the way we do it. So a lot of it is skewed. I mean, obviously there's propaganda. It's a propaganda, war, and they'll show some footage from a third world country, a guy in flip-flops slaughtering a cow and saying, "Oh, this is how it's done commonly." And then you go look at somebody like Temple Grandin, who shows you this is how cows are killed in the United States. And obviously they're dying. We just can't get past that point. I mean, they're dying. I think their death is probably more humane than a lot of ways humans die. I've seen a lot of human beings die. And it's a slow, often painful, awful process where these cows, they're happy, healthy one day, and then boom, within 3 milliseconds, their life is over. We can argue that that's, we should let them live out their natural life expectancy, but let's talk about the natural life expectancy of a ruminant animal. I mean, there's studies on white-tailed deer population. This is a very similar analogous animal in the United States. And, if we look at the average white-tailed deer's life expectancy, something like 60% of them die before they reach like 30 weeks of age. And they don't die nicely. They don't die in a pleasant fashion. They're ripped apart by a bear or a coyote. They freeze to death, they starve to death, or they have some kind of infection. So their life is not, a wild animal's life is not better. And I know people talk about, well, if these animals weren't created, they wouldn't exist and therefore they would have no suffering. But really, and again, we have to talk the difference between chickens and pigs and cows. There's a lot of nuance there, and there's ways people raise this. So it's not just a black and white, all, large-scale farming is awful and all, plant-based is wonderful. It's just far more nuanced than that. So I would challenge people to go visit, go see a farm, go actually walk with a rancher, talk with them, go visit these places that you're criticizing, because most people haven't done. People living in New York City, and I don't know how many million, we had 8 million people in New York or something like that.
Maybe more, yeah.
They don't live on a farm. They have no idea. We're totally disconnected from the food source, and they were criticizing it. And, we see these ranchers saying, look, here I am every day, putting a back scratcher on my cow. I just posted a video on my Instagram today. The guy's, cow's getting his back scratched and his head patted. And these guys are doing it day to day. So it's really a different, the reality doesn't match, the presentation. And so, like I said, if you're trying to make that decision based on ethics, go get firsthand experience. Don't rely on me or somebody else to tell you. Go find out for yourself.
One of my guys went back to his hometown in Spain and was like talking about, the vegan, I'm vegan now. And the farmer was like, been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years on his farm. Pigs, they're eating the acorns, they're growing the thing, and they raise they slaughter it, and then they wrap it up and eat. And they're just like, what are you talking about? We've been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's sustainable. We're living off the land. Sure, we do some crops, and sure, we do this. And they're like, this is an invention of some, urban intellectuals of human brains with too much time on their hands. And that was the feedback he got.
We have, we're seeing this right now. There's this push, and I know I've talked about the sort of the plant-based meat, the soy protein isolate and the pea protein isolate, and then the next sort of evolution is going to be the synthetically, cell manufactured meat.
Yeah.
And people are really excited about that. And then beyond that, they're talking about we're going to take microbes and fix nitrogen from the air and make food out of air, basically. And there's some technologies going on there. And so the assumption is that a scientist is going to be able to tell us this is exactly what human beings need to eat, and we're going to perfect it. We're going to have food as software. I've heard that term coming out. We'll be able to download the instructions for the microbes so they can produce the perfect human diet, the pellets or whatever. It's like the Jetsons or Star Trek or whatever. That's what they want to see coming. And the reason beyond that is not, in my view, it's not to make us all healthier. It's basically profit driven. It's like we can make a lot of money on these cheap, low ingredient things, and that's what we're seeing over and over. But the cell-based meat, when we look at the actual process to do that, I mean, they have to take a cow fetus. They basically take the field bovine serum. They take a big needle, stick it in the cow's heart. After the mother has been slaughtered and the fetus is still kept alive, because they have to get the blood and they can't anesthetize the fetus because it would cause problems with the serum. They draw the serum off. They stick the cells in that, and they have to continuously provide that serum for these cells to live. And not only that, where do these cells get the protein? There's not like a protein fairy that comes in and gives these things protein. They have to get proteins from somewhere. So they get it from soybean isolate, from pea protein isolate. So you have to make these giant monocrops to support the cell-based culture. And then the question is, well, these cells don't have an immune system, right? They can't fight disease, so what do? They bathe them in antibiotics. We hear all this, oh my gosh, there's antibiotics in meat, but they're bathing these things in antibiotics. And so, I mean, you think about how that process is gonna go out, and then we look at a cow, which is powered by the sun. I mean, it's solar powered. You don't need fossil fuels to make a cow, turn grass into meat. But you do on these big plants. And so they've looked at the carbon footprint and say it's probably a net negative. And so but again, it's all marketing. We see this. Even the big meat companies, and some people could, Dr. Baker is a shill for the meat companies. I'm like, I wish they would support me. I'm doing their job for them, basically, quite honestly. But the big meat companies, Cargill, Tyson, JBS, Marfrig, they're rebranding themselves as protein companies. And what they do is because they also see that this potentially $100 billion market of alternate protein is where they want to go. And so we're seeing all this heavy investment. And so we're seeing this, don't eat meat, it's good for the planet, buy the protein. I walked down 7th Avenue and I saw beyond this, beyond that, impossible this. It's everywhere. There's a huge marketing campaign. And again, what are you eating? What are you selling? You're selling highly processed, plant-based, which is a euphemism for cheap and profitable. I mean, this is what we're being told, and it's not going to make us healthier. It probably won't make us any unhealthier because we're already so sick. It's like you won't even notice, right? Because we're already metabolically demolished. I mean, there was a study that came out that said 88% of Americans are metabolically not healthy. So we just add more slop to the mix. Man, no one's going to notice. These guys are going to make their money. We're all going to feel better about saving the environment. And I think that's a big problem.
You're a doctor, I mean, and I remember my mom brought me up in the 70s, and the thing then was skim milk, right?
Yeah.
It was skim milk, because fat's bad. So I was on skim milk all as a kid. And, we see these funny fads. Eggs are bad, now eggs are good. The cholesterol's that, now maybe it's something else. I mean, as humans, and you've seen this from the medical side, we have this funny way of going through these fads and cycles, like you said, by maybe being super myopic about focusing on one thing and not thinking about the holistic picture. When the old school people are like, what are you doing? We've been doing this for 100 years. Is this just another one of those iterations, this plant-based movement?
Well, I think that, again, whenever there's a lot of money to be made, there's going to be a lot of push behind that. And, for the foreseeable future, I think you're going to see that. Just to your point about, one day eggs are good, one day eggs are bad. This is all this epidemiology. We'll run some study, and this study of 50,000 people showed that there is a 10% improvement in outcomes when you don't eat eggs, and the other one shows 10% improvement when you do eat eggs. That's all garbage. You should just dismiss that stuff. If it doesn't even show at least, a doubling, tripling, quadrupling, even 5-fold increase, you don't even consider that stuff. And that's what we should be doing. We're saying it's just complete garbage. Why don't
you want to see an anomaly, a statistical anomaly.
Well, you want to see a real study. Let's do an actual study. What these people were sick or diabetic, and now they're not. And I think I tend to be more in favor of that particular strategy. But there is a continued push for us to, eat whatever food the food companies want to make. I mean, this is what we're seeing continuously. But yeah, to your point, 100 years ago, we have orders of magnitude more testing procedures, knowledge than we had 100 years ago, and yet the people are sicker than they were before. Our grandparents didn't need to have hundreds of tests. My father lived to be 95. He was a boxer. He fought undercard when Max Schmeling fought Joe Louis back in Chicago. I mean, and he was healthy. He died at 95. He was eating bacon and eggs and that stuff. My father was less healthy than him. My father, fortunately, is still alive. But as we see the food system shift, and then arguably until my 40s, in my early, because I'm 53 now, in my early 40s, I would have been less healthy than my father because I'm just eating the same garbage. And then once we get back to, eating the real foods, the foods that we would have had available 100 years ago, whether it's plant-based, meat-based, or whatever, I think that's as simple as that.
Yeah. How'd you get into this?
So I've been an athlete my whole life. I've been competitive, obviously a surgeon, kind of interesting background. I was probably mid-40s, probably 42, 43. Just gone through a divorce, feeling crappy, 280, 290 pounds, working hard as a physician. And I was just kind of like, I just don't feel so good. And I was starting to develop sleep apnea and hypertension and metabolic syndrome. And I was training. I was training my ass off. I was running sprints, lifting weights. I was strong. I just won a world championship in Highland Games, running around in a kilt, throwing cabers and
on those big logs.
Right, yeah. So I was a big, strong, athletic guy training hard. But I was like, I got to change my diet. And so I did almost a plant-based diet. I went, lots of vegetables, big salads, a little bit of protein, really lean protein, chicken breast, fish, and I lost weight. I did, and I cut my calories and I exercised more. And I went from like 285 to 230 in about 3 months. I dropped it off, got lean. I was just like, super conscious about that. The nurses hated me because they were like, you're a cranky son of a bitch now. We like the fat Dr. Baker better because, really, I was hungry all the time. I was constantly fixated on food. This is not sustainable for me. And, then I started adding some more animal fat in, did a paleo diet. Went in and started reading some of the low-carb literature, books, started studying about this, did a low-carb diet, a ketogenic diet. And then a little over 3 years ago, I started reading about these people doing this all-meat diet. And I just kind of had an open enough mind. I said, well, I'm going to try it anyway just for athletic performance. Because I was still competing. I was in this rowing stuff. Now, this Concept 2, CrossFit, Olympic rowing type stuff. And I said, well, I'll try that out. And I got reasonably good on that. And on a ketogenic diet, I'd set an American record. Then I wanted
Which is counterintuitive because most people think you need carbs to do a race like that.
Right, yeah, depending on the distance. And I went on and started on an all-meat diet. And not only did I get stronger, but I got faster. I took several seconds off my already American record and set a world record, over 50. And I think the difference between a ketogenic diet and a meat-based diet is just a little more protein. And the protein, I think, allows you to better restore glycogen, so you can do these glycolytic type activities without the carbohydrates. And I think and again, this is another misconception. I don't think carbohydrates necessarily are bad at all. Glucose is essential. We need glucose. We definitely make it if we don't give ourselves it. We have ways to do that called gluconeogenesis, through lactic acid reshuttling, recycling rather, through conversion of amino acids to glucose, and then also some of the fats of glycerol. So we value glucose. It's very important. And we're doing these high intensity exercises. Our liver's kicking out glucose if we don't have it. And so that is something we can do. The problem with carbohydrates for some people don't tolerate them as well as others. Some people find that the food that the carbohydrate is wrapped in, not the carbohydrate itself, but some of the other, you can call them plant toxins or whatever. And I'm not out here saying that broccoli is toxic to people, but I'm just saying there are compounds that some people tolerate better than others. And if we can look into what some of the thought is on why we're seeing people have success in a carnivore diet, a lot of it has to do with gut pathology or gut permeability issues. We see very profound glucose stability. That's one nice thing about gluconeogenesis. And Joe Rogan said, I was just calm. I'm just calm. My energy's stable.
Right. The anxiety was down,
right,
and he just said he felt better.
Right.
Which I hadn't heard that before.
I hear it all the time. I literally hear it every single day. And I think what's happening, there's a couple things happening there. So when our glucose levels are very stable, our mood is very stable. And what we see is people are generally just kind of chilled out and happy. I mean, this is just kind of the resting state. You still have to react to the stresses in the environment. You still get mad, you still get sad, but I mean, generally it's pretty calm. And I think that's due to glucose stability. But the other thing we see is that our gut permeability is improving. There's some researchers out of Hungary doing some great work on this, and they're looking at gut permeability. And they can literally see when you eat certain foods, your gut permeability increases to a pathologic state, and when you eat basically a meat-based diet.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.